All right, well, good evening, everyone. It's 6:18 and we have 7 folks here. Excellent. So with 7 folks, I'm sure some of the folks will arrive. So with that, we will call the meeting to order. I want to thank everybody for coming. I know it's a hot July day, especially as folks are taking time off and visiting with family and friends. So appreciate that. Really want to thank staff for putting a lot of work into this draft plan. It's definitely very, very comprehensive. I think it's something that we're all going to be really proud of as we talk about where we want to be in the next couple of decades here as we think about everything that we want in here in Ruff County, which is really, really important. So with that, I want to go ahead and confirm our agenda today. So do we have any additions or edits to the agenda? No? Do we have a motion to approve? April. Second. Everybody vote in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Great, excellent. We are still working on the June 15th SAC meeting notes. I know the staff has been very, very busy. So we will hold off on reviewing those as we haven't had a chance to look at those yet. With that, we'll go ahead and do that another time. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Mark to discuss preliminary draft of the Region 2 plan.
Okay, so again, SAC members received this late last week. It is really just our rough draft. It hasn't been put into that polished InDesign type of format ready to be published, but it will be by the time we launch the public review process, starting what we anticipate is July 25th, and that process will run for roughly 45 days until September 7th. And we can get into the next steps here in a little bit. But again, just to let you all, set the expectation that we just wanted to get show you how everything is ultimately put together in the document, so that you have a chance to see it before it goes out to the public. Right. So the first couple chapters are our introduction, identifying the community description, some additional data. Most of that data is actually up on the hub site. If you go to the hub site, we've got a lot of that information up there already that you can take a look at. Then we actually get into our topics: natural environment, built environment, healthy communities, healthy economy. If you remember, this is sort of how we then looked at the strategies to address some of those challenges and opportunities that you all reviewed in January and February. And that these are coming out of those issues that we heard about from the county department presentations and the discussions we had going back to January of last year. Then we talk about how this plan actually gets implemented, and then appendices with some additional information like glossary, acronyms, commonly used acronyms, and the public process that helps support this master plan. So we can roll right through these chapters. Again, we're just sort of looking for some big picture type of comments, anything that we're missing, anything that we just got really wrong. So we can just, if that sounds good to everybody, we can start going through it. Okay. And again, we also don't have some of the maps and figures up. Our GIS team has recently completed those. And again, those obviously will be folded into the document when it's ready for review at the end of the month. So one of the key points here is to really emphasize the fact that this region plan builds on Plan 2040. I think we've been trying to emphasize that throughout this process, that Plan 2040 was that countywide master plan that was completed about 2 years ago. It identifies, you guys know how many strategies we had?
600.
600 and the goals, right?
Or something.
So there's a lot in Plan 2040, and the goal for these region plans was to drill down and identify the specific issues within Region 2 and the specific communities within Region 2, and see if we can identify strategies or recommendations to address those specific strategies. So there may be when we get to the implementation chart, you'll actually see that we then gave it the strategies another look and said, okay, what's sort of like a county strategy that wasn't in Plan 2040 that you all identified was important, and let's just kind of break that out as this is a Region 2 strategy, and then this is a county-wide strategy. And interestingly enough, these county-wide strategies are what the other two regions have talked about as well. So everybody's sort of recognizing that there are still some of these outstanding issues that Plan 2040 didn't pick up. So we touched briefly on just a little bit of the process here. Starting back in June is when the county actually started on the process. And then you remember in December of 2021, you all had your kickoff meeting. And then we started meeting right after that. We talked more about the plan purpose, and then the organization of the plan, like I said, is addressing within these chapters, which we'll get to, but basically identifying what the baseline conditions are, what those challenges and opportunities are, providing some context to that so that we're just sort of building up from that foundation of what are the issues, where can we identify solutions to those, and how do we ultimately implement those. That's sort of the tiered system of this plan. We talk about the relationship of this plan to 2040, as well as additional plans which are identified in the appendix. We also have something like that in Plan 2040 as well. Again, we don't want to repeat what Plan 2040 has, so what we identify in the appendix are any plans that have been adopted since the adoption of Plan 2040. One of those is that walk and roll plan, where the bicycle pedestrian master plan that the Office of Transportation recently completed. So we'll provide a little context for that in the appendix. Again, one of the main themes during this process was ensuring that everybody had equal access to participate in this process, and that they were represented, and that the then strategies address any inequities throughout the region. So we want to make sure that we just call that out here. And you'll see that obviously when we talk about housing, for example, or parks, that those equity issues are interwoven within those strategies and then the chapters as well. And then we've yet to write the executive summary. That's something that, once all these comments come together, we'll be able to put that together again before it goes out for public review. So that's the first chapter. I'll stop if anybody has any questions about the first chapter. Seems pretty straightforward. Okay.
I did have one question on the 1.4. It just where the last sentence before the bullets, where it says elected officials and staff that kind of use the plan. The plan is which one? Is it?
Use the region plan.
The region plan.
Yeah. Yeah, we can specify.
Good point. Yeah, that would be good.
Yeah.
There's lots of time.
Yeah, exactly.
Because the region plan in essence supersedes 2040, right?
It amends it.
Or amends it.
Yeah.
Should we say this region plan? Because,
Region 2, right?
yeah, it's region 2 plan.
But will they have to go back to 2040 at all, or can they get pretty much everything you need from this region plan? You know what I mean?
Keeps referencing.
So they'll have to like.
But for instance, the planned land use map that we will now have for Region 2 will become the planned land use for Region 2.
Okay. All right, gotcha.
And ultimately, when we get through all 9 regions, Plan
Yeah,
2040 is
we'll
planned.
start
Yeah,
again.
Yeah,
right.
I mean, but right there after the bullets, it references plan 2040, not specifically, but if you want to see what they're talking about, then you got to go to plan 2040.
Right, I got it.
Okay. Chapter 2. Chapter 2. So existing conditions. This is where we just provide some overview, providing the geographical context of Region 2 and then the various communities within Region 2. some of the boundaries. Major employers, major transportation networks. And then we want to set ourselves up to illustrate some data to, again, help support some of the recommendations or the strategies at the end of the document. So we've got a series of 4 maps. I don't know, we've got to work with the publisher on these maps. I hate when a map is super out of scale, it's squished. So this was taken from a draft document. We're working with the author to sort of get those maps in a better scale. It's very distorted at the moment. But if you can just use your imagination, those will be cleaned up. And again, we're just trying to make the point that here in Region 2, there are pockets of poverty. There are areas of disadvantage, areas where there's a lack of public transportation. Connecting the dots, there's a high minority population. And what you've also heard from our Department of Recreation and Parks is that there is inequality of a variety of park elements in this western part of the county. And this map is the summation of those analyses. Okay. Again, scrolling through here, a lot of this data is already up on the hub site. We're just going to put it in more interesting graphics than when it goes into the plan. So again, we talked about how there's housing deficit, given the population forecast, housing was a big thing that we had talked about in our discussions. Employment, having the state's largest employer here in the region helps drive that as well. And then another item we included here were community descriptions, so that we have you all remember, I think back in November, we worked on the Region 2 vision, how you envision this area to grow, what's important, where you don't want to grow. We've done the same type of thing for the various communities in Region 2. We talk about, again, what some of the specific issues are, where there is a lack of parks, where there might be a lack of transportation. Again, just really drilling down to that finer detail to help paint that picture at the end. Okay.
Hey, Mark, I had a question. I should just email you, just let me know.
Okay.
I just didn't know where Annapolis Junction stopped and Jessup started. Because Annapolis Junction says it includes the National Business Park.
Yeah.
And Jessup goes down to 175. And I just didn't know if that should. I was wondering if Annapolis Junction should read that it goes all the way up to 175.
Okay.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So you have Shannon's Glen in there, you got townhomes in there, you got some of that stuff.
I didn't know, it's not exactly right either.
It's not, you're right,
Yeah.
it's not perfect. It just looks like something's lost when you try to read the word, that's all.
Yeah.
You all want me to bring up the community boundaries? I can do that. if you'd like.
That map will be in there.
Okay. Yeah, it will be.
Yeah.
Yep. Okay.
Yeah, but you're right, yeah, Tom, it does say Jessup goes south to 175.
It does, right, so it's south to 175.
I took offense to that, yes.
I'm not taking your offense to it, I just pointed it out, it did say there was no housing developments in it. And there are housing developments in Annapolis Junction. That's why I'm wondering where we drawing that.
Yeah, I think it's slightly south of 175.
It is,
Yeah.
it's south 175,
Yeah.
but Annapolis Junction includes the National Business Park, which.
Yeah. If you ask the Jessup Improvement Association, it goes down to Route 32.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
Jessup goes down to 32.
Yeah.
So the interesting thing is in Plan 2040, I think we have about 2 paragraphs that explain just this conversation you all are
Right.
having about how difficult it is to identify a boundary between two areas. So we can tighten up some of that language here.
I just wonder if because it calls out our private park,
Mhm.
does it make sense to have the boundaries be public roads? instead, like 175?
Sure.
It seems like it'd be more appropriate to me, you know, National Business Park. Might get redeveloped for all I know. You know what I mean, just something else.
Yeah.
So
Understood.
why not make it the way?
Sure.
Okay, and just to recap, our communities are Annapolis Junction, the Fort Meade, it also includes Tucson, Research Refuge and Tipton Airport. Hanover is actually a community that's split between regions 1 and 2. The Jessup community.
Before you scroll by there, I had a quick question. I was a little confused, on Jessup. Where is this? It mentions removal of adequate public facilities testing exemption to consider, where is that? Somewhere on page 11 there.
Talking about the roads at the bottom.
Yeah,
For us.
I don't understand what that, yeah, there it is. What does that mean?
This was that discussion that we had about the balance between applicants with developments and how much improvements are made to scenic and historic roads
Okay,
versus protecting then the integrity of that scenic. and historic.
so it's a double negative? Removing exemptions. Okay.
Yeah, because the scenic and historic road criteria says that certain roads are exempt. So the comment saying that you would remove the exemption,
Got it. Exempt from,
APS.
okay. Got it.
But it
All right.
currently has
an exemption. Correct. Yeah, and we're talking about removing that exemption.
I
Good.
think there's.
I thought it was saying the opposite.
No, I think it was consideration for removing.
All right, yeah, thank you.
Okay,
Keep going, Martin.
okay. The Laurel community north of 198. And then lastly, the Maryland City area. Okay, and then we have our Region 2 vision. Okay, so let's, if everybody good with chapter 2?
Yeah.
Okay. We'll move on to chapter 3, the natural environment, and we'll hand it off to Sam.
Yeah, so for the natural environment, it's what it says, we're talking about all the natural resources that are located in region 2. Kevin?
I don't know if we want to talk about typos.
Oh, yeah, sure.
Line 5, challenges such as, you have to add as. All right,
A lot of
here.
people read this. I can't believe
That's-
we didn't pick that up.
I like it.
okay. It's just unfair.
Between Plan 2040 without a space or Plan 2040 with a space.
It's not supposed to have a space.
Right.
There's lots of things
We'll-
where there's.
We'll do it cleanup, yeah. Thank you.
So you'll notice, I'll point this out, this one to see if it's consistent with all the other plans. We start with the general paragraph of what is being talked about in all these sections. So for chapter 2, planning for natural environment launches directly into what we're talking about. These quotes, these were for these chapters, the chapters I was working on, pulled these from public comments we were tracking. So anything quotes are pulled from community members who responded to surveys, questionnaires, or community events to kind of state what their interest or concerns one that I thought would relate pretty appropriately to these chapters.
They should be identified as such.
They're mostly, are you talking about their by name?
No, just identified
You need a
as
number.
public comment.
Yeah, so later on,
Just the one thing there, the first one says studies, but there's no, like, what studies? Studies have proven, like, I don't know, I
Yeah.
find that the quotes aren't necessary, but that's my other thing.
Oh, I like it. But I was wondering where they came from.
I was wondering the thing.
Yeah, so pulled from community feedback that we've been tracking
Yeah.
throughout the process.
That's public comment.
Yeah, so after we get through the introduction, we talk about the specific goals from Plan 2040 that these sections will to address. So these are all goals pulled from Plan 2040.
So can I ask a question though? The first paragraph is pretty negative. And it states a lot of things like rapid forest cover loss and things. What facts can you put in there to make it sound like it wasn't somebody's opinion?
Yeah.
It's the way it kind of sounds.
The more specific the backup.
Yeah, 'cause rapidly developing, I mean, what's that based on? I mean,
Yeah.
the housing permits are like 50% of what they were last year, and they're like 50% of what they were 15 years
Mhm.
ago, like, what is that based on?
Yeah, well, we can go back and add more statistics to kind of tie them into any kind of claim like that. Just so it's not like, this is what's going on, moving on.
Yeah,
Don't have the loss of force.
yeah, because, I mean, you would think it should be less now because of forest conservation than it was, you know, in the 80s and the early 90s.
Then after we get through the introduction, we get to sort of talking about sensitive resources where we're specifically talking about watershed. Talking about how generally based upon federal standards that all watersheds in region 2 do not meet federal guidelines, and trying to tie that into inadequate or failing stormwater management facilities that may have not been kept up to date, that obviously do not contribute to the overall health and quality of those watersheds.
I do think it should be, you know, a lot of that is a lack of stormwater for older developments, and that
Mhm.
I think should be incorporated in there.
Yeah, and on top of page 2, we do have something saying particularly where intents to develop prior to modern stormwater management regulations. So we still trying to tie it into those common themes, such as older developments that may not have modern stormwater management facilities.
Well, there are two issues. There's old projects that have absolutely no stormwater, and then there are the less old, but still old projects that do not have quality control, only quantity control. We probably should clarify that.
Yes. Then we get into the water quality, talking about how clean waters act standards in each watershed. I have a feeling that it's kind of the same thing that went up in the introduction, where we're claiming that, but there's no statistical backup behind it.
Yeah.
Besides, we do have a reference at the bottom to the watershed assessment, but we can pull statistics out to support certain claims that do not come off as opinion.
Right, because I didn't see any mention of like any farming in here, because that's a big, you know, contributor.
And then capping that section off with trying to tie it into, it wasn't farming, but we did get into upgrading septic systems, because that is a large contributor to nitrogen and phosphorus pollution into those watersheds. Talking about the county's efforts to try and encourage homeowners to connect to public utilities to reduce that pollution runoff. One big factor we want to touch on in region 2 is the large amount of forest cover. Compared to most other areas of the county, I think region 2 has the majority. Obviously, the pulp touching refuge is a large contributor. But in this section, we wanted to highlight that along with its species, mostly because that is a specific area requirement for amount of forest to talk about what is kind of like the priority in this area.
Is that based on this mapping, or are you just looking?
That
at
is based on
contiguous acreage?
That is the FIDS mapping. So the 9,690 acres is based upon our GIS analysis, saying this is what meets FIDS criteria in.
75 acres. Greater.
Yes.
But that doesn't mean it's just because you pick an acreage of forest doesn't mean.
Yeah, it just meets the bare minimum size requirement. There still needs to be the study behind it to identify those bird species habitats with forest interior dwelling species habitats. So that's not claiming that they are FIDS habitat, they just meet the criteria of potential habitat. Tying that into the green infrastructure network. And then we do get into current environmental regulations, talking about what is in the county code in terms of environmental protection, talking about forests, non-tidal wetlands, streams, steep slopes, anything you can think of that is environmentally sensitive in the county with code references.
Is the language in this chart, such as under non-tidal wetland streams, is that exactly what it says in the code? Does it actually say prohibited? For some reason, I didn't think it did.
I'm not sure, I can double check
It's misleading, you know.
where it's just saying you can't do it entirely, but there are certain,
You know, like outfalls and such, where
Yeah, sewer lines of county, you know, or anything.
yeah, you're talking about modifications that could, if you do have to disturb a wetlands buffer, or you do have to put an outfall in, it's not,
There's also now legislation that for stream restoration, you don't have to deal with costs. So that's needed for like streams and things. We don't have any critical area here, do we?
no.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say. We can maybe just drop that.
Yeah,
But
bogs, I don't think any of the bogs are located over here
we
either.
definitely don't have critical area, 1,000 feet of within time
Yeah.
waters.
We can remove that, that's fine, so I should pick up on that and tore that out there. After we get past, regulations.
No, I know, water since you were saying.
Yeah, now we get,
No, go ahead, go down.
So
The
we're
water. I looked like you were passing that.
Actually, we're just at floodplain at the top.
No.
One thing that you might want to be consistent with is where the last sentence where it says areas to the county through the subdivision process. It's actually the subdivision and development process. You have it that way in other,
yeah, just for consistency.
yeah.
Then we get into good old water and sewer, public, utilities, starting off with water, stating that what is servicing the region 2 area. With some statistics on what is actually being served, planned areas.
Approximately 32% of the region, I'm reading right from the top, approximately 32% of the region is currently served by the county public water systems. An additional 8% is planned to receive sewer service. Is that supposed to be water service? And is that 8% for sewer or water?
That's supposed to be water,
Okay, and 8% does reflect water.
yes.
Okay,
Is that 8% based on, when you look at the master plan, there's like planned future,
Yeah, so 32%, that's your existing service. The 8% plan is what the Department of Public Works accounts for with their calculations for capacity. So they're taking into consideration that this area is planned for future service. And if we do hook up to this, it doesn't overwhelm the system.
okay, so that should be water service.
Yes.
oh, well, then you might want to not use the words planned in future. Because the water and sewer master plans have categories called planned in future.
Mhm.
And I think that'd be a little confusing. So this is really capacity, is what you're saying, 8%.
Well, it's
Of the-
actually what it is, and. I know we have to check the numbers, but it's the 8% representing what is in planned service and future service. And that's the way the growth tiers law,
Oh, so this is the service, the planned, it's not capacity.
if we can't make it more clear.
So yeah, section on water still going down, it's talking about how sufficient groundwater supply should support any forecasted growth. Did touch on elevated radium for groundwater, that's just putting in that tidbit on kind of future concerns as the area proceeds or develops.
No, radium is like a natural thing.
Yeah, but it's just point out as a concern. I believe it's talked about in the water sewer master plan.
Do you know if those water tests, because I know the port, so we're a Superfund site because of what we cleaned up with tanks and things back in the 40s and 50s. We do active monitoring in wells and in of that nature and, you know, between PFAS and other things. Right now, at least our reports are that everything is still good, but do you know if any of these tests are at least factoring in that ongoing monitoring that for, because we're gonna be monitoring for a while.
I'm not sure if that takes into account information that the port's producing. But I can double check that.
I mean, like I said, we monitor it, everything's come back, that obviously is still within limits and regulation and where it comes through, but that is an active monitoring, which tells me that results can potentially change at some point, so.
Okay.
We should at least mention that here. The fourth one.
And I can get, like, we have a restoration advisory board, if you need information on our monitoring, I can provide that.
Is there a map that goes with this that actually shows these areas or no?
There is a map that is within the water sewer master plan. We will have a map for the service areas. We don't have a map planned for the radium testing. We can include it. But I don't think we were planning on to when we were first talking about what maps were going to be included within the Region 2 plan.
I don't think that would be useful. The radon.
Radium. My well has radium and it's condemned. But it's a very low amount and we've made a new well already. And we looked at water treatment and you can't get water treatment for radium that is working consistently and it's very expensive. So we use a lot of bottled water, but we still use our well, that's good water. But there is radium.
Radon.
There. So, well.
Yeah.
When we replaced our well, they tried to go down 1,200 feet and we ended up with a 300-foot well because they hit rocks and they broke all their bits and they were gonna leave or finish the well. So the county said they should finish the well. So it was approved by them, but then it was not approved because small, like 16 parts per million radium.
We might want to change that one sentence. New and replacement wells in the area are required to be installed to a minimum well depth to meet drinking water standards for radium. Did your new well, it had to go down deeper to get to a different aquifer?
Yeah, so but right in Jessup, it's very much, there's clay and then there's rock. And it's all mixed together and to put in a well, you need to put in one end where there's rock or where there's clay, but a mixture of the two was very difficult and we were without water for a long time while we were trying to mess with this. But, so I just feel like when I go to sell my house, maybe somebody will come up and say, no, your well's dead.
But I don't think a map would help because it depends on the depth.
Right.
As well as.
That's why there's a lot of 300-foot wells, because that's where they're all around here. Other people have the same problem with hitting rocks and breaking the equipment. And then the people not wanting to do it anymore.
Well, they need a different drone because I put in a geothermal heat pump system and they drilled down past 300 feet, down 400. They hit rock and they knew they would, but they had the right drill bits.
They want us to be, well, you have to,
Yeah.
they
So,
couldn't get past the rock.
okay, yeah, they
They
need,
just never get through the rock.
they need a different drill rig.
Well, they were gonna buy a different one because I broke theirs.
So after we get past water, we provide a quick little diagram just talking about daily demand, if it was all built out, and then build out for maximum daily demand for the 3 different water service areas of Region 2.
And the build out's based on,
Build out is everything included in land service. So if
the build out by what, like 2050, what's this build out based on?
We have to go to the water sewer.
I don't know.
And I'm thinking it was 2080. I mean, it was way down. It was a study done by, that's what he said, what it is. No, whatever, no, probably should quote that to have the source there. But the last comprehensive water strategic plan was done. That's what it's referencing. They did a build out.
So 2020 demand is based on whatever was built. The build out demand is based on
Zoning,
zoning.
Or zoning,
current zoning. Well, zoning as,
the time and
the water sewer, map, which hasn't changed very much.
All good on water.
What is this chart? I'm not quite sure what this chart's doing for us, though, like. This is based on zoning, but is there capacity for that? Or are they, does capacity have to be? Does DPW have to increase capacity to meet this? Like, I don't really understand what's happening.
No, and you're right. I think we should add to that table just to show what the capacity is, so that there, you know, that there's. Cause that's just on the demand.
Yeah.
And there is, but we don't have water issues, really. I mean, other than the water quality problem areas we have. We
maybe
don't have
like a
capacity issues in the county.
max capacity column or something added on, so you can just see how much.
Something so it's relevant, yeah.
Moving on from water, we hit sewer, talking about, once again, we go back into what is existing, what's planned for, touching on how the service agreement is handled with Baltimore City, because Hanover and the northern part of Region 2 sends their waste up north to city's wastewater treatment plant on the Patapsco. We do touch on county's investment to upgrade wastewater facilities, just to reduce their nitrogen phosphorus output to bring them into compliance with federal standards. Provide some charts on to talk about projected flow and the capacity of each service area.
So this chart might be better as just one across instead of capacity at the end of one, and that it like loses its.
Yeah, it looks like it's two separate.
Yeah.
I get what you're saying. So,
So ultimately, you're saying by 2050. There will be enough capacity in Baltimore City.
yeah, that's basically what it's saying. The caveat here being Baltimore City is handled through different types of agreements that are there between the county, Baltimore City and Howard, because it does cut up a little bit into their territory. So it does look at like there is a maximum capacity approach. That number is a little bit easier to handle versus facilities owned by the county. And then just a little information on Champion Forest area that the health department has identified for some wastewater management problems that have increased the risk to septic failure.
So is part of putting this in here to help aid the Department of Public Works in sort of the master planning and where, you know, where things should be looked at to provide capacity or provide service? Is that
So
the
this
purpose?
comes from the water sewer master plan. I mean, this isn't new to them, but it's more informative for the community. One, and two, also in thinking about development. And any potential capacity issues.
And then we end the chapter with challenges and opportunities as they relate to the natural environment, talking about roadway flooding, limited tree canopy, water quality, unmaintained stormwater management facilities, habitat and forest conservation, and then opportunities for the future, such as flood reduction, expanding tree canopy, incentivizing environmental rehabilitation, community partnerships, and county partnerships. That is natural environment.
So under water quality, you say runoff impaired by runoff from developed / paved areas. Would it make more sense to say, you know, existing communities and roads, because that's really what it is. It's a composite of all of it. It doesn't matter if it's new, old. Right?
maybe impervious.
Or yeah, maybe it's
Yeah.
that, as simple as it.
Developed could have
Yeah.
certain technologies to capture.
Exactly, they're probably better off.
All good for chapter 3?
Yep.
Okay, moving on to the built environment then. Chapter 4 here. Just provide a little bit of history of how Region 2 came about. From the 1930s through the 60s. And the presence that Fort Meade has had on the region. And then we get into housing.
Can we stop there for a second?
Yep, want to go back up here?
Yeah. You could- Mr. Jones provided some information. So we got conflicting information about BRAC. So when I asked BRAC when we were on base, with Public Information Officer time, they were like, BRAC hasn't had any major development or any issues in this area. In fact, really didn't impact us. But here it says most recently in 2015. Is BRAC an issue? What, did BRAC have an impact on this area or?
Yeah, so I would,
Oh, yeah.
where did you have that discussion? Because I've been the public affairs officer for like 2000.
Well, when we went on a tour of the share.
There. So I will say,
Yeah.
I will, yes, Mary worked for me, so.
Yeah, I asked a like very pointed question. She said, really, BRAC has had no impact on this area and will have no impact moving forward.
Well. The fairness in that comment is the whole community got wrapped up in BRAC. So if you remember, we had a ball. Right? So growth has impacted us, but out of that, we've had two major growth areas that have happened. It's been BRAC, which was the first one that came in 2011. And then NSA recapitalization / emergence of US Cybercom and the built up of it. To put that into context, BRAC took up about 9 holes of the golf course.
Okay.
The other 27 holes was taken up by NSA recapitalization and US Cyber Command growth. And our growth in the future is more pointed on US cyber and cyber elements coming here. So BRAC had an impact of like 5,600 people or 6,500 people. And it continues to be a steady stream, but in that context, from what you're telling me, it did not BRAC specifically, because we spent a lot of time differentiating those two growth projects. BRAC did not have nearly as significant of an impact on our growth as the recapitalization and the establishment of Cybercom. But growth as a whole has impacted us greatly. So I'm going to give Sherry the benefit of the doubt because we pushed that language harder. Hey, everybody wants to push BRAC, but BRAC is not really the thing that people need to be worried about. Because that's.
But correct me if I'm wrong, Chad, but BRAC also, a lot of jobs left with BRAC, right? The whole division used to be headquartered there.
Well, First Army was here, but we were a net gain of about 6,500
Okay.
employees with BRAC.
Now, one of the things is the type of people, military people who are here changed tremendously. Because my understanding is most of the enlisted people left, and it was mostly officers who came in.
Yeah, that's not accurate. The composition really hasn't changed that much. It is changing now back more towards service members.
Okay.
But, you know, I would say it's been fairly consistent. About 2/3 of our population has either been civilian and contractors, with about a third being military.
Okay.
Those ratios are still about gonna stay the same. With maybe a little bit more, maybe more 60-40 civilian military with the growth that's going on.
There's a lot of civilian growth. You talked about within the gates, outside the gates,
Yep.
there's significant growth.
Yeah.
BRAC related there too. So when you talk about BRAC, you gotta talk about both sides.
Yeah.
But you also have to talk about the port brought all this extra employment and it does have an impact on the area because of cars and everything else.
Oh, yeah, and it will continue to, because one of the things with the realignment, if you're talking cars, is One thing is office space. So part of the NSA recapitalization is also moving people out of office parks. Not necessarily right in the area, as MVP is growing and things of that nature, but more satellite location. Big part of NSA's redevelopment is bringing a lot of people from those offsite locations back onto the board. So that will have, we got about 10,000 new employees. They talk about the growth, that has happened really since 2021 up until about 2028. That's still gonna happen, but we're also expecting at least that much just to transfer back to us. So current employees on our book will now be driving on the post. The one thing we do not and I do not have is a lot of that data I just shared was all calculated pre-COVID. So the impact of teleworking and how that is maintained by all, at least anecdotal data, is showing that that's going to at least reduce the number of cars that we thought were going to come, because more people are teleworking and they're gonna maintain.
But that's kind of a minimum with NSA. I mean, all of the NSA people I know personally, they very quickly went back.
Not
Couldn't
also
work
the
remotely.
support people that have portable work. There is a great deal of support people who have portable work.
Most of our park remained relatively full during BRAC, whereas during COVID, whereas our other parks like Columbia Gateway and some other places experienced significant vacancy during the whole time for those very reasons. You can't take the work home.
Yeah.
And we're talking NSA moving over and doing what they're doing. There's a lot of other requirements within the fort of other agencies that are still filling office spaces with their contractor requirements, which is why the region is still growing at a time where office just isn't being produced. It is in Anne Arundel County because the fort continues on with the mission with various.
Yeah.
It's
So-
land, a lot of places,
Yeah.
like OPM, they relocated a whole bunch of people here, investigation, it's cheap land, so,
On base.
on base.
Yeah, so that was part of the BRAC. So there's two sides, so like ISSA was our largest BRAC organization. Got about 50, it's about the size of the Arundel Mills Mall, it handles basically DOD school. They have actually, with COVID, they have about 5,600 employees. Most of their employees are still teleworking. NSA, they're not teleworking, but most of this employees are still teleworking. And then to your point about the growth, so yes, NSA is recapitalizing, but like our senior command and the one that is probably most emergent is cyber. And not just US Cyber Command, so we now have the DoD headquarter component for Navy Fleet Cyber. So you have US Cyber Command, which is a combatant command that continues to grow and get funded, which handles all cyber activity Department of Defense. And then each service has a service specific component. Navy Cyber is now headquartered at Fort Meade on that center part of the golf course, as is Marine Forces Cyber. And then one thing we just learned about 2 weeks ago, Fort Meade also has the second largest contingency of Space Force outside of Colorado. Because they all need to tie into the networks and the data and the stuff that we have. So the future growth of the fort is going to be more in those cyber type elements that are currently tied to the NSA backbone. But as they move from that, we sat with Federal Reserve President for the Richmond region yesterday, talking about growth and things in this region and like contract. So Cybercom itself has got currently about a, $60-70 million contracting budget. That's getting boosted into the billions just for Cybercom alone over, the next 4 or 5 years. So that is different growth other than, NSA is not going anywhere. NSA is strong. It will still remain our largest tenant by a lot, but our other partners are growing with it.
But when it comes to planning for the built environment, Fort Meade doesn't have to meet the restrictions that everybody else does outside the fort, and that's part of the problem. Because the roads aren't necessarily improved to where they should be for whatever you're doing in the port, and I think that's cause, something has to happen where that same schools, you know, happen where that there's equity.
Don't know. Well, so on Fort, I guess the Fort does not necessarily have the same standards as the county Fort's road. We are doing our major thoroughfares. We have military construction projects for it. The one thing that will ultimately cap the port's growth, at least I'm posed, is the fact we're only 5 square miles. And it is about full. I mean, that's finding additional space on Fort Meade is not an easy thing to do.
You have to redevelop.
That's what MSA does. That's what MSA doing. They're basically taking their buildings that were built in 1950. They couldn't add more stuff to it, and that's that whole recapitalization. And once they're done with current making new buildings, they're gonna work on their old buildings and make new buildings there too.
So why don't I add the NSA recapitalization? I'll work with Chad to get some additional language.
Yeah, that would be.
And just build that out a little bit more. Okay.
Thank you.
I didn't even take up that.
No.
It's okay, it's
Yeah.
We can have to talk all that. If
Yeah.
I feel like I know a lot.
that's-
Okay, so we talk about housing, we're pulling in the goals from Plan 2040, that talk about housing.
Can you go back up? Are those the goals then? That's where, those are all 2040
Mhm.
goals.
Yeah. Okay. Again, just sort of setting some baseline information about, with some statistics about our housing stock. And the different types.
So our goals aren't going in these chapters, they're just going in the chart. Okay.
Again, setting the stage of a bulk, setting the stage for our housing recommendations that are primarily focused around affordable and workforce housing. Making that point here within this chapter.
But can you go up real quick? Yeah, I apologize. So you've got Region 2, our home value is 360,000 compared to the county. But then our rent is like $300 higher than the rest.
Yeah, it's 2 years earlier. But that is from 2 years.
Yeah, this is the data that we can, that's readily available to us.
But still, it's the comparison, it's interesting.
It's probably worse.
It is not.
Not 360 and 389 anymore.
Yeah, I'm sure the rental rate.
Jumped yesterday.
Yeah.
Then we just want to have an inset. You see these types of insets in Plan 2040 where we want to call out specific topics like housing diversity. We've talked about missing middle, how there may be opportunities maybe within existing neighborhoods to retrofit single family homes into maybe duplexes or encourage that type of development in newer developments so that we're not just getting single family homes, going back up to this chart here, where we're not just necessarily getting single family homes or townhomes or apartments, but there's more of a mix and variety of housing types, duplexes, triplexes, quadplexes. Okay. So just calling out that and providing some more information on housing types. Then again, we've got some more statistics in here for the county and for the region, talking about affordable housing and what some of those statistics are.
And these forecasts and quoting, are they also from 21?
Within this paragraph or coming down the next page?
The next, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, I'll get to that here in a second. Holding capacity, if you remember this, Spencer provided a presentation on this, I think, at the beginning of March, right before we started our zoning review of the maps. Really talking about how there's this, based on current zoning, how many units can you actually get? If you were to build out the vacant parcels and the underutilized parcels, and comparing that then to the household forecast. And the statistics showed us that there's a housing deficit. There isn't enough housing to support that forecasted growth in the area. So this paragraph just explains that, and then we've got our statistics here. I do want to mention that we had rerun our holding capacity analysis, so these numbers are actually slightly different than what you saw back in March.
Okay.
It's a difference of 4,900 units. And I think we said it was 36, 39 maybe in March.
Yeah, worse.
That paragraph that starts in region 2, you have Arnold in there.
Oh, look at that.
Oh, you said Jessup Park.
Yeah.
I'm guessing you took Suburban Park and changed it.
I think you saw that.
Yeah, really. It's the upper class, actually.
Is everything in caps a defined term somewhere?
In caps.
So for example, under in that paragraph, we're just reading. Like community
yes.
opportunity, for example, is that in like,
Yeah,
just have to go back to the case.
Is that new communities of opportunity or just because
It's one of the things that they use when the state is looking at funding of low-income housing tax credit projects. It's one of the things that adds points to a project, is if the project is in a community of opportunity.
And we have the definition then in the appendix. Yeah,
And Mark,
So there's state maps.
sorry.
Yeah.
Those are state maps.
they are, okay.
Mark did the research to enhance this.
Which means.
I'm not an expert.
When I read it, I was like, nobody's gonna get it, you gotta give them more.
Okay, and then because we've broken up the built environment chapter into sort of smaller sections like housing, transportation, we did just want to identify the challenges and opportunities for housing in this section. So again, the challenges being housing affordability. When we heard from our affordable housing developers, they acknowledged that there are some challenges in getting their projects online. Lack of diversity of housing types. Financial incentives for affordable housing, and then our opportunities that we've discussed as well.
I also thought we talked about just the cost is a
Cost
challenge,
of
like
actually developing in
fees
the
and-
county.
Yeah,
Yeah.
impact fees, connection fees, all those things that just up the cost of the houses.
So we do say that at the lack of financial incentives, the last sentence is development fees increase the financial infeasibility of affordable housing. Is that?
Why don't you say development, impact and connection? Is. What's under that?
Mhm.
That's not just affordable,
Sure.
that's every single unit in the county.
Something I wanted to highlight here, we talked about, now I'll follow up with you. But, you know, we've had a lot of conversation, plus Councilwoman Hummer, when she was here, talked about, you know, how can we have housing policy that ensures that future projects have a certain amount of housing units set aside that are affordable below market rate, much like Paddock Point and others. So I definitely would like to, under opportunities, that work on some of that messaging about how council can make policy decisions that can help incentivize affordable housing.
Right, because there have been sort of threads of various efforts within the county and it just needs to be pulled together and actually enacted. Okay, then getting into land use and zoning, we provide a description starting at the highest level with our development policy areas. Again, that just sort of set those broad brush areas. If you remember, some of the names of those categories were critical corridor, say Maryland 198, where there's the development and any future developments should sort of address any transportation issues. Critical economic in Fort Meade, National Business Park areas, neighborhood preservation, where again, the general policy is that these are existing neighborhoods and they should more or less sort of stay the same in the foreseeable future. And then we also had our development policy overlays, which formerly was the Jessup Village, which is now removed, and the transit-oriented development policy area overlays that are in Laurel Racetrack, Annapolis Junction, and the Dorsey, up near the Dorsey station.
Is critical, so looking at Maryland 198, this is just a, should it be designated as a critical corridor? Or is critical corridor something like a,
That's an actual designation, so.
okay.
So this map, are we gonna see this before it goes out to the public?
So this is the map that you all had really recently worked on as recently as June, our last meeting, where we went through not only the zoning applications, but any other comments that we had received. So
But I don't think we didn't review that policy area map, the whole map.
during the March meetings, you gave it a review. We talked about removing Jessup. I'm trying to think if there were any other areas that needed to be tweaked. There was the Dorsey station. We asked if you wanted to keep that as a transit oriented overlay. And you said, yeah, let's just leave it. It's a long-term plan. There's no harm to sort of leave it as is. Yeah. And again, so when we met in June, we handed off those changes to our GIS department, and they're working on those right now. So that's why we don't have those maps back to you, but they again will be available for the public review later this month.
This is the location of within one of your favorite comments, you probably want to, with the targeted growth area designation for yeah,
Mixed use.
for mixed use.
Yeah, again, we're still working on what that needs to be.
Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, it definitely is not preservation. Neighborhood preservation.
Oh, and now with the,
Yeah.
The mixed use projects. I mean, the whole goal of mixed use is high density and.
originally they were in the 2009 GDP, they were all listed as targeted growth.
Yeah,
Mhm.
makes sense.
Some of them are developed, so are they really targeted?
Well, they're always targeted. I mean, there's still a lot of things that can happen. I don't think any of them are completely built out.
Then drilling down a little bit further here, we have our planned land use map. Again, those different categories, for example, were commercial, mixed use, low density residential, low to medium density residential, medium density residential, just generally industrial. So we just provide a description of that. And again, we'll have a map as well. And then ultimately is the zoning, which gets very specific about what the development regulations, what you can and can't do with your property and various uses on those properties. And again, examples of those are your R1, R2, W1, W2, C1 up to C4, that we spent a majority of the time on in March, as well as then at our last meeting in June. So that again just provides an overview of a lot of the information that we covered in March, providing that context. Then we wanted to, again, provide, the goal of this document is really to provide guidance for the elected officials to make any changes to the zoning code or any other, say, legislation or for capital projects. This section here is intended to capture your ideas about the different mixed-use areas you all envisioned in Region 2, recognizing the differences, say, between the Maryland 198 corridor, the Jessup train station area, and some of the other areas then within Region 2. So that's the idea behind this section here. Just to sort of describe that nuance. In some areas you said, no, we don't want it to be 6 stories. We want it to be 2 to 3 stories. And we want to reflect that here so that when there is new legislation creating new mixed-use zoning districts, this helps inform the creation of those districts. So some of those areas included the Laurel Park area.
Now, here you, when you say Laurel Park, you really do mean Laurel Park.
I do.
Like Jessup Park. Okay, yeah, but yeah, people, that's not really a neighborhood. Shouldn't it say the area around Laurel Park racetrack?
So we did look at
I think we did the house.
just the Laurel Park area, recognizing that that is a prime area for redevelopment.
Okay, so that is a label for that neighborhood, Laurel Park? Because I thought Laurel Park just refers to the racetrack.
Well, it's not housing here.
Yeah, I know.
So I guess it's technically a neighborhood now.
We are, so when we say Laurel Park, it is just the racetrack property and the property across on Brockbridge Road.
That is also made by Laurel Park.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay.
So if there's confusion, should it just be Laurel Park Racetrack then?
So that was the thing that we were thinking about when we were writing this plan is what is the correct name for that? And the prevailing term we found was just Laurel Park. That strangely, not strangely enough, but then the train station is Laurel Racetrack. So
Mention the racetrack in the second line.
yeah, so we will need to be, we're just gonna have to do one of those, find and replace and just make sure that we're being consistent about the terms that we're using. And maybe Marilee, to your point, is we can say Laurel Park, this actual property and specify.
Okay, no, I'm okay.
Yeah. Okay, so the sections you all had identified as being mixed use and identifying the difference between them was Laurel Park, Laurel Racetrack, the Maryland 198 corridor, Annapolis Junction. Now, granted, this was an area that was rezoned to one of the existing mixed use zoning districts proposed to be rezoned, right?
We wanted to go down.
NXDT is what you all had settled on at the last meeting.
Yeah.
Yeah. But again, just wanted to capture the discussion so that when there are new zoning districts, your concepts are carried through. Okay. The Jessup Mark Station, the Maryland 175 corridor, as well as then in the northwest corner of Region 2, the Dorsey Mark Station. Okay, and same thing here, we identify our challenges and opportunities between the different, with the need for various planned land uses to then help set up and support the need for various zoning districts. And then the opportunities, again, the fact that the western edge of the region is the railroad, and there are several train stations here, and I think that's something that you all were excited about, that provided a lot of opportunity for redevelopment, supported by public transportation. Okay, then moving into transportation. We pull from moved Arundel, which was the county's sort of countywide transportation plan. We pulled in some information from Walk and Roll, which was the most recently adopted plan that addresses bicycle and pedestrian needs and strategies to address those needs. So we'll provide some supporting maps here, illustrating the bicycle pedestrian network and the transit network. Some of the commuter, and Chad, we might look to you to confirm some of these numbers. But some of these commuter statistics that we were able to pull from various sources. And one of the first graphics that I had showed in one of the introductory chapters about how this area really needs some more public transportation options. This was a graphic that came from the Arundel Economic Development Corporation. If you remember that way back, I think they were in April of 2022, where they talked about how many people are coming into the region for work and how many people are leaving for work and how many are staying within the region for work. And the challenges of transportation, I think everybody's familiar with traffic congestion, speeding in residential neighborhoods, limited options, inadequate transit facilities, right? Looking at Laurel Racetrack, missing sidewalks, and yep. But again, there are some opportunities that we can capitalize. We do want to just include a section here on climate change. It's whereas other regions 4 and 7 are located along the coast, so they'll address more of the sea level rise issue. But I think again, climate change happens to everyone, so we do want to at least just provide some mention of that here. And then lastly, cultural resources, providing an overview of some of the history in the area, what the Cultural Resources Division does, some statistics on the resources in the region, and again, the challenges and opportunities that cultural resources or the preservation of historic resources face. Okay. Okay, move on to chapter 5. Healthy communities. So this is our school, these are our public facilities, these are our schools, our parks. And that's what this chapter is going to address. So set up the same way, we've got some introduction, pulling in the goals, and then jumping into recreation and parks. And again, talking about how there's the deficit of parks and programming in this area. So we provide some context there, pulling also from the Department of Recreation and Parks' long-range plan, where they identify some of those issues as well as where they plan to invest in the future, or what some of their goals, what their goals are in the future. You know, and again, the Patuxent Research Refuge is also that outlier where they are that recreational, where they provide that recreational service, but there is only essentially one way in, one way out. And so we do have a few strategies that address that or try to enhance the accessibility to that area. Okay. Then again, also building on the presentation that our Department of Health and Aging and Disabilities Department provided last year. There were some issues that they had identified in this area. And you'll notice that they also tie together, a lot of these issues really tie together. So what aging and disabilities, some of the issues that they raised, sort of coincide with those transportation issues, making sure that individuals have those services to get where they need to go to, say, health services. So we do touch on that, the need for healthy food, accessibility to food. And then we also get into schools. And making sure that there's adequate infrastructure. There is a lot going on with the redistricting and the recent bills that are trying to address these capacity issues. Because there are school seats available, but they're not in the right places. So through some recent legislation, they're trying to address that, but during our discussions, we also identified some additional strategies to help with that. And then lastly, other public facilities, we had libraries discuss some of their needs and opportunities within the area. Public safety, just touch on some of these local assets in the community. And then ultimately, again, our challenges and opportunities. Equity and access, school quality, school capacity.
So on the school. If you can go up to the bottom.
Yeah.
I would not, it's not just Mead High School, I would, pretty much the entire cluster, at least is what we're dealing with the Friends of Mead issue. The issue, the perception of the school quality, I would.
So you think saying school quality, Mead High School cluster?
Yeah, well, yeah,
And then
Mead
it
High
means all the
cluster,
schools.
because I think most school, I mean, you ask most people about like MacArthur Middle School and they'll. They have the same.
Understood. Yeah, good. Okay. Again, we just touched on some of those opportunities that there is Board of Education land, there's county land that's not being programmed. And there are opportunities to program that land for certain needs, public needs in the area. Okay. All right, chapter 6 then, our healthy economy. I'll hand it back over to Sam.
Yeah, so for healthy economy, we're focusing on those large economic centers such as the Annapolis Junction community, Arundel Mills, the plans for the World Park racetrack, as well as that commercial corridors you see along Maryland 198, 175. So we start by talking about what kind of the job types we see in the area, and then talking about kind of what we see in terms of the real estate market. The area has about 10 million square feet of industrial commercial space to highlight that.
Does that include Fort Meade?
It doesn't, it does not include Fort Meade. This came from economic development board. So I don't believe it is accounting for Fort Meade.
We should mention that.
But does it, so that first paragraph, the number of employees that work, does that include, because Anne Arundel County, I mean, we're the largest employer in Anne Arundel County, and most of the largest percentage of our employees come from Anne Arundel.
There is a section on page 3 that talks about how that region 2 job amount does not take into account the estimated 64,000 employees that Fort Meade estimates. So there is a little bit of discrepancy between the claimed number of jobs versus what Fort Meade is providing. There's just 2 separate statistics we're providing to clarify what is accounted for and where.
Is there a reason to not include Fort Meade? I mean, they're the biggest employer and
May need to clarify it in the paragraph. I mean, there are different sources, I think.
and then if you had an influx of commercial industrial, I mean, what's that based on? I don't think it's been much commercial.
Yeah, we can provide, I guess we can look at the permit numbers to figure out what is accounted for where. And within a specific time frame. Going back to making things that seem more like opinions of back and then with some sort of analysis.
Yeah, and unfortunately, you can't go by like approved projects because some of them aren't built.
Mhm.
If you're trying to show like actuals.
Mark, you could shut this down right away, but is there anything within the county or within this plan that makes sure or stipulates that because we do create a lot of tax revenue and not just the port, but around the mills and more racetrack? Is there anything that stipulates that Region 2 gets its fair share of that tax revenue to counter its growth? I thought I said a question.
Yeah. That's come up many
The tax revenue for the county, right? It's not concentrated here. Sam, you do have sections that talk about the Laurel Racetrack Fund and then the Arundel Mills LDC, where those monies are stay in essentially Region 2. But we can talk about probably the tax generation.
Yeah,
Periphery fund.
I know, and I agree. Then you do an awful lot.
I've said it too, I'm like, where is that money going? Is it going to this community?
Well, the
Run the
racetrack-
mills, or is it going to one big pot?
Right.
Spread, you know, spend
The
it?
racetrack impact, we have that over at Russet, but we have to use it for beautification or public service, so.
Right.
You know, we buy fire engines all the time for our guys.
Yeah.
Well,
So I was gonna say it's limited, but it's. you know,
And there are two funds in Region 2. It's the Laurel Racetrack and the Arundel Mills. So,
But it's, you know, we always talk about traffic and everything, and all these things are paying impact fees, and you don't see the county building new roads. Or, I know a lot of them are state, that's
Yeah.
probably a part of it, right?
because we do a lot of stuff, we bought the things that we at Russet have paid for county, police officers. County said, oh, thanks, we're not gonna do anything more, because they know we'll pay for it. We're still not getting our fair share, we're able to get what we need, but they rob Peter and pay Paul, kind of like the lottery, you know, we'll put it to education, but we'll take it out of the general fund, you know, that type of thing.
okay, so we'll tighten up the employment numbers and square footage here.
And with regard to this pie chart, what I find a little like confusing is you base it on properties, not square footage. I don't think it matters how many properties. If you look at the square footage, that's really what the uses are. You know what I mean? Like, so in reality, there's office and retail, and it's showing this huge, you know, more than half the county retail. That's not true. You only have 450,000 square feet. It's just confusing.
That makes sense, it's a square footage rather.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, these properties could be little
Understood.
1 acre.
All right, you got the square feet right there.
Yeah, we have.
Yeah.
Yeah, after we get past the,
Versus.
right, yeah, we have the statement of what for me that based upon what Chad was mentioning earlier about cyber and space. Probably need to amend it and with those up-to-date numbers to kind of highlight what is coming to the base. Because for some reason I have a feeling that 22 billion might be a little small, but.
And the 22.3 billion in economic activity, what is that?
That was provided, I think,
That was provided, so a couple things in this paragraph, so. Because I guess things matter, we are the second largest army installation. By population, they're in the United States. But there are Marine, there's the Navy, there's some other installations that.
So not just
Not military as a whole, no, we're not, yeah, but Army specifically. That $22.3 billion was generated by the state of Maryland, the Department of Commerce. And they did an economic impact, they have a Maryland Military Installation Council, which basically adds up the economic impact of military installations in the state. The number they came up with, and I think they got a new one coming out in about 4 months. But 22.3 billion, which. Again, I guess where we're going out, making sure we get, that calculated out to about 6% of the state's entire GDP.
Wow, we should say that.
And it was about 52%, so Maryland had like 15 different installations and federal entities. Fort Meade's economic impact is larger than the other 13 combined. Like we're like 55% of the economic impact, but that was based off jobs, that was based off of contractor base, that was based off salaries. All that, the state of Maryland worked with Townsend University to compile all this. So we use that number, right, but because we didn't make it up. We're able to say, hey, this is what the state says about us, as opposed to what we say about us.
But it doesn't relate to region two. This is more of a state.
Yeah. It does, yeah, because I mean, essentially it's not all in region two. So like employees live in the county. They all drive on region two roads that drive in. That is an absolute fact. But most of our employees by like zip code data comes from Pasadena and Glenburn.
So I just
Right.
don't,
Which is why though we complain about there is no mass transit that connects us to Glenburn and Pasadena. But yeah,
but this isn't a correct statement because we're saying the economic growth in West County. I don't, doesn't seem like it makes sense to be here. I mean, they're not seeing that, the benefit from all that in region two.
well,
Yeah, I don't think, yeah, I'm with you. So that's, we're not receiving 22 billion dollars in economic activity here.
No.
no, but from I get what you're saying. I would say how the calculation was done is your stores and all the businesses that are being put up and used primarily because the port is here. Certainly runs into that. The schools and the fact that there's 7 schools on the port, that's certainly a benefit. That's at least where it comes through, but I get, and that's why I asked the question, like, you know, what is stipulated for that region 2 gets the actual, they get a lot of the pain, but region 2 does not seem to get a lot of specific benefit.
Yeah.
Is it worth saying a portion of that economic activity?
Yeah. Yeah. And I would be fairly confident in saying, at least again by zip code data, that Fort Meade is probably the largest employer in region 2.
Oh, yeah.
And so, I mean, that certainly has an impact on tax base and everything else. So I will certainly push back and say that there isn't any positive impact from us.
Oh,
But it doesn't have necessarily have an impact on tax base for, you know, the county. How many percent of the people were coming from out of the county into the port? It's a tax base for other people. Counties. It's
We're
not-
the largest employer in Howard County, and we're a top
Yeah.
4 employer in 5 other counties in the state.
Or just?
I just.
I keep saying, it's like we're in 21st century, all this thing, stuff, and our direct neighbors don't, you wouldn't know that at 22. And it's probably more now because of how it's grown, but you would not know that a $24 billion industry is right across the street.
Yeah,
And
but I
that's not
think
right. I mean,
this section's talking about the healthy economy of region 2, and I think this is misleading.
yeah, because you're right.
Yes.
It's a state number,
It's,
but I
it's not
think we can clarify.
Yeah.
that it's a state
$1
number.
billion, they wouldn't have some of those businesses across. the board.
Well, some of them, and they know they don't have to move. We have tried very hard to get a lot of those
Yeah, but
businesses
some of
to
them use a
upgrade.
nice paint job. and
Yeah. They don't have to.
I don't want to.
Yeah.
The carpets aren't actually on this one, literally.
Yeah, and that's where it got into like when we were discussing housing. Like, most of the housing directly related to us already filled up and it's a lot of subsidized housing and, you know. So. It's not very fair, but that's also part of the reason why a lot of employees don't live. Or as many employees probably don't live in Region 2 because the housing or, you know. Certainly most directly around it. I mean, up until like 5 years ago, we could not live in these buildings. It was an off limit.
Your village, yeah. Yeah, it couldn't-
So now moving on, you'll see a very similar,
Well, what
graph.
are we gonna do about it though? Like, are we gonna change it?
Yeah, we can, vote to amend it in a way that ties it more towards.
To the top of the paragraph. Yeah.
Yeah, we can look to amend it to tie it more towards the impact on the region too, not so
Yeah,
much
not just
claiming,
the state.
using
Yeah.
state numbers and just kind of trim it up a bit so it relates better to the region 2 area, not so much other counties and other counties.
And I don't know if you add correlation to it, but it does go back to the point that not all of Region 2's employed, not all those employees live in Region 2, but again. All the employees that come to work. Use Region 2 road, wherever they come from, they end up.
Yeah, that needs.
Yeah, but their taxes are. That's for.
That chart, that map
Yeah.
does a good job of
Yeah.
portraying that.
Yeah, the one.
I mean, it shows.
Yeah.
Okay.
How many? Yeah, similar map to what Mark showed in, I think, built environment of the amount of people driving into the area versus the amount of people driving out to reach employment with only 1,000 residents reporting that they work and live in Region 2.
And there's 1,000 people driving in circles. Yeah. Every time I do that. Just find another circle there.
They can't find their job.
Or they don't have one.
Then we get into the redevelopment and commercial revitalization. We talked about the Maryland 198 corridor, talking about the need to focus redevelopment on those retail properties to make it a more attractive business center. As well as Laurel Park. We talked on the Laurel Park racetrack or Laurel Park. And now we need to figure out what we're gonna make it as clear as possible to what Laurel Park is. And at the end, we do have a little note saying that this is where we talk about, you can find the description in built environment, or is that somewhere else?
Strategies such as built environment.
Right.
The Laurel Park.
Yeah, it might be under actually the community descriptions where we talk about to go look into,
Yeah, I think so.
built environment for the description on the future mixed use vision for those specific areas.
Oh, here you attribute the code. You should do that.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I know.
After we talk about commercial revitalization and redevelopment, we get into business assistance offered by Arundel Economic Development Corporation, as well as the Workforce Development Corporation as well, trying to talk about what services are offered within the region to kind of help bolster the economy. And then at the end, get back into challenges and opportunities, challenges being impacts of Fort Meade, commercial vacancies, few retail options, affordability and accessibility of childcare, as well as support for small and local businesses. Opportunities being the commercial revitalization district along Maryland 198, and then economic drivers of some top employers that are tenants in Region 2.
Again, I don't want to beat that horse, but the impacts of what we tremendous economic assets. I mean, I think when you clarify the rest of it, you should clarify that too. For Region 2.
Okay. All good for healthy economy chapter?
Well, I'm sorry, on that last paragraph, I guess that sort of, the high household incomes, I thought in one of our meetings. We discussed or showed that the household income in Region 2 were not, like, I thought there was a data point that our household incomes are not as high as some of the other regions.
Well, yeah, it's lower than the state average. We saw that.
Yeah, it's like, the salaries are high here, but the people don't live here. Yeah, we need to.
So that to me says as much about your point that you were trying, that you've made about not seeing the full benefit of.
Yeah, it's high salaries with the household income don't reflect the salaries of people that work here.
Makes sense because there's so few opportunities. That 6% number that we saw here.
No. What, 4,900,000 dollars.
They're like, things like prime for public and private investment, I just don't know what that does, like, what does that mean?
I think so. I mean, if the fact is that there's projected job growth in the area, then certain developers might be interested in developing in this area, so it helps catalyze the area.
Are you reading it like it's public and private together, or is it,
Yeah, I guess so, not.
are you saying like it's a public-private partnership, or are you saying? it's
Just
like
public and private. Do you want public and or?
There you go.
That's right.
Figure it out. That's what most.
Yeah, sure. That one. Okay, then moving on to chapter 7. This is our implementation chapter. We just want to provide a quick little primer on what this is rather than just laying on the implementation matrix. This brief explanation, I think it's.
Oh, you
Two
fixed the
pages.
reference to region 7.
Yeah, I was gonna. They found that.
Was there?
That's
Yeah, it region 2, in the first line used to say region.
One step ahead of you. So again, we just provide some context and some examples of what you're going to then see in the implementation matrix, where we have a strategy and then who would be implementing that.
But all 3 example strategies are not from our region.
Yeah. I mean, we can change some of this.
Shouldn't it be from our region?
Yeah.
Yeah. I would
Okay.
think so.
I mean, so we don't care about
South, Severn,
South River.
Yeah,
I'm just
no
saying
offense.
it's an example.
it's just an example. That's the point, but.
Yeah, but I feel like
Give an example for your region.
Yeah,
an example that applies to us.
It stuck out to me too, I was like, maybe I just used the text.
Yeah, no, I had to read it a couple of times before I figured out.
We started to read stuff.
Yeah.
Okay. Yep.
Remember, we're paranoid about how. Okay, our region is ignored by, and here you have a bunch of examples from Annapolis area.
Understood. Okay.
Yeah.
So the only thing I would say with that, I guess. Because I also know people take things literal, so. Is an example strategy, is that something that would definitely happen? Because people will read, and if you put. Specific region 2 landmarks or areas in an example strategy, people will read that as fact.
Yeah, so again, we include this context to help set those expectations. We can certainly elaborate on that.
Or maybe not be specific to. Specific, right, because that's kind of more general in nature.
Yeah, I mean, I 100% agree, it should be local examples are best, because you gotta think local people are gonna read it. But just so then, how you can keep local people from saying, oh, I read in 2040, this is gonna happen.
Yeah, but if you read what it's talking about, scroll down a little bit, Mark. It's really just talking about studies and ways to address issues and some examples.
Let's just make it less specific again, just delete Severn.
It's already less.
I guess
Well,
this
we'll
is
work
an
on that
actual
too.
strategy, right?
Sorry.
It's an actual strategy you pulled out of 2040.
It's a strategy from region 7.
Oh, right.
I agree with all, I just deal with.
Yeah.
Yeah, people
Yeah.
reading stuff and they see it in print and they see it in bold, they
Yep.
start talking of it as fact.
Understood? Yeah, we'll work on that.
Snake River in there, see if anybody.
Yeah, right. That's actually really funny. New River Gorge. That's there.
They can figure that out.
And then if you all remember our. What's that?
It's example, isn't even in our state.
And then if you remember what all we covered in January and February, going over the different strategies, and then we touched on again when we heard back from public comment. Those strategies are listed here in this left-hand column. Like I mentioned at the beginning of the meeting, we did break them down into region 2 strategies and strategies that seemed a little more general that could actually be applied countywide. We created its own category here as well. Additional columns were related Plan 2040 goal or policy, the implementation mechanism, whether it's going to be a piece of legislation, whether it's a capital project, whether it's just an operational procedure. We identified that in this column, as well as the responsible department. We will need to add the acronyms here. We do have them in chapter 8, the appendix, but probably also makes sense to probably actually include them here. An estimated time frame of having those implemented, as well as then how we would actually measure whether it got implemented or not. And we also then lastly have a column here, since region 4 and 7 are also working on their plans, whether they've echoed this strategy in their plan as well. Okay, so that's chapter 7. And then if we were to jump back to chapter 8 here with our appendices, we include acronyms, the glossary of terms, and jump through this a little bit quickly. A summary of the public involvement process starting back in December of 2021, taking us through the various public questionnaires, the number of meetings you all had, and then if we need to add any additional data or maps, those will go in those sections. And then, like I said, there's another section here for relevant plans that have been adopted since Plan 2040. A summary of those, as well as a link to those plans. So that's your region 2 plan. Preliminary draft. Thank you.
The next thing is you're gonna put it up for public notice. You said July 25th.
So, right, we're polishing this up. We're gonna take your comments back, look into that, make those tweaks. And then we plan on putting out the preliminary draft of the master plan, the region plan, in a similar tool like we used for the initial draft zoning map. So one of those tabs, if you're familiar with it up the top, will have some introductory language context of what this region plan is. It'll have a link to the plan. There will also be a survey monkey questionnaire where you can leave comments on that preliminary draft plan. We'll also then have a tab for the preliminary draft zoning map, and you'll be able to comment on. The public will be able to comment on the applications as well as any additional changes that took place after the initial draft of the zoning map. And we'll also have another opportunity for people to just comment generally on the zoning map. Then we'll also have another reference tab, which includes the updated development policy area map and the overlay, plan land use map, as well as some additional layers for context.
And so after that all happens, then we come back and go over again.
Yep, so if you're ready, I can
I
can jump to the next steps.
Well, you'll see the maps in the preliminary. Public.
Not until July 25th, and it goes up to public. Right? Not as a group, not as a.
Not as a committee. We may be able to mail them to you, get them done. I mean, we're constantly updating and it's just back and forth right now.
So, right, we're aiming for July 25th to September 7th for that public review. And then if we can target, because we'll need a couple weeks to download those comments, review them, come back to you all with a summary of the substantive comments. If we can shoot for September 21st for our, what would be our last meeting, to review those comments on that preliminary draft, and you all then would provide that final guidance for a planning advisory board draft and make the final recommendation on the plan that you all hopefully then support the plan being adopted and the zoning drafts of it.
So the only thing that I would ask is you have that the open period until September 7th, and then you said you need a couple weeks to put everything together. That means we won't have a composite to look at before we meet. Is there a way to push us a week or so that we can, I mean, a week isn't a lot of time to review all this stuff.
We're gonna be reviewing comments July 26th as they start coming in, right? So I see your point is if comments close at 7, we're reviewing them. Hopefully people aren't waiting until the last minute to submit their comments. Then
That's what we all do.
yeah, we would have roughly a week or 10 days to turn that around to you.
I mean, is there some kind of, is that?
Yeah, I hear an early, is there a way to
Could we
bump
make
up the draft public review or something, or give us more time?
Yeah.
To the September 28th potentially.
Right.
Or just
Yeah.
say the 21st? That is tight, this is a lot to read.
And a week is not
Yeah.
a lot of time for us to go through it.
The public comments, you mean?
Just everything.
Mhm.
I don't know how we're gonna do it all. Well, I mean, we're under some strict marching orders for our schedule. I mean, I reviewed 3 plans in 5 days. I know you all have other things you're doing.
Like part of it.
Yeah.
So is that PAB, is that something mandatory you have to meet that,
The planning advisory board.
is that set?
The schedule set, I mean, I don't know the actual date isn't, there's not a public notice for it yet.
So so that September 21st is set, so we can be done in enough time to give you time to prepare for the PAB, is that?
Mhm.
And the PAB is something fixed that has to be whatever the date is set. I'm guessing you guys didn't get to pick the date of the PAB.
We have some flexibility. The problem is that we really need to get to council by January. And so, and it takes, there's time in here that, like just preparing the plans, getting the plans printed, giving the planning advisory board time to review. Law will need a month to prepare the bill to go into council. It seems like there's a ton of time in there, but really it's not.
It's not because planning board will be reviewing 3 plans pretty much at the same time.
I guess then to the question, is September 21st, was that put up there? Is that is that given, was that under the assumption that's the most time you could give us based off the rest of the plan? That's not like you're asking for more time.
So it's sort of splitting the difference where we've been typically meeting on Thursdays. And yeah, we're not meeting September 14th, September 28th might put us a little behind. We can
Depends on how many changes.
Yeah,
What's more important to the board, meeting on Thursdays or having an extra 4 or 5 days?
yeah, I mean, we could kick it to that Tuesday of the following week, which would be September 26th, potentially. Give you all another weekend. Enjoy doing that on the weekend.
Football will be on. So.
I don't know, the
Why
Tuesday.
don't-
I don't think the NFL owns Tuesdays yet.
Oh.
Can we just, we'll discuss,
Yeah,
and then
let's
we'll send
discuss,
you a
because I
doodle.
wanna- I need to see,
Okay.
I need to see calendars,
Yeah,
and then, I'm also, and I don't know this off the top of my head, have you been giving them the raw comments?
we, for the, I forget which version it was, you all received the raw comments. And then you also received a summary of those comments.
Because we may be able
So-
to give them a download of whatever we have at a certain point, so they can get started on reviewing
Yeah,
them. I mean,
Halfway
that's-
through or so.
It depends on how many we get, like,
Mm-hmm.
most people procrastinate and get us the last minute, so it is kind of hard to judge if we would be able to do that.
Well, is that 25th to July 25th to September 7th, is that time period statutory?
No, so here's the problem, and this is coming from me. When you put a draft out to the public in August, because we could do a 30-day review. Everybody is gonna come back and say, we're on vacation, we can't get this thing reviewed, and so we're trying to capture a 45-day period that gives people notice. We did the same thing with Plan 2040, because we were in the same kind of time crunch. We went out for public review in August. We said it was going to be a 30-day review. We kind of got clobbered. We extended into September. We went to council the first meeting in February. Unfortunately, the calendar for me with the PAB and the council, like I can see down the road. So we could try and skinny up that public review, but we'll see how it's met once it's out there.
You didn't have as many, you didn't have a whole lot of.
From the zoning, it was 38 comments. From the draft strategies. I don't remember.
And how many zoning changes does this region have? It's a small number, right? It's not.
I mean,
They were-
could you move the preliminary draft review to the first? Because really, the first is the Friday before Labor Day, like. It's not gonna get.
I mean, okay, I know people are on vacation, but you're not on vacation.
Yeah.
I mean, if you really are that serious, if you're serious about it, you're gonna set aside an hour. If you cannot come up with one day, one evening, maybe two in a month, you're not that serious about it.
All right, let us talk about that.
We'll reach out with some potential dates for the September meeting.
Well, and quite frankly, this plan is not nearly as big as Plan 2040. I mean, there will be 3 of them out for public review at the same time, but Plan 2040 was 450 pages. And this is less than 100.
I might have missed this, but the changes we talked about tonight, are we gonna be able to see that before July's birthday?
Nope. No.
We just have to trust the offer. Okay.
Well, I mean, I just took 3 pages of notes. Mark has taken notes. We heard what you said. I mean, we're not gonna blow it off.
Fine, we'll trust you.
Yeah, and this is a reminder, this is the preliminary draft, and you're very much
Still-
invested in this, but it's not the final voice of the council.
And also don't forget, you are part of the SAC, but you can make individual comments when it goes out there for public review.
Yes.
So And you can make comments at the PAB, at county council, you know, I mean, we have a long way to go. The plan is gonna change significantly. You know, even with Plan 2040 at county council, we added pages to the plan. Some of those amendments were big amendments. So that's just the way the process works as every layer of review happens.
Yeah, I think we'll be in touch with scheduling shortly. And then, yeah,
A lot of work, good job.
Yeah,
yeah, the team effort, it really is, yeah.
It's perfect to hand out to people.
Yeah, you can keep them, again, is the easiest way is just acounty.org /region2, and that'll take it to the website. Yeah. So, and again, when I say that there are a lot of people working on this, you know, Spencer, he's been part of the team, and there's been a variety of other folks that you haven't even met that have been working on this as well.
All right, looking for a motion.
I'm ready.
All right,
Sure.
Motion to adjourn, Thomas, Marilyn. Motion,
Yeah.
that's the aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, thank you very much.